Genghis Khan was a great political leader who brought order and civilization to the Mongolian people. The Mongolian Empire was built through bloody war and conquests. However, Genghis Khan created an organized, structured society where religious freedoms were allowed. Under the rule of the Khans, Tibetan Buddhism flourished in Mongolia and was adopted as the national religion. Although this peaceful religion conflicted with the bloody conquests the empire was founded on, Tibet and its people had geographical and cultural characteristics that were similar to Mongolia and its people, allowing for a seamless integration of Tibetan Buddhism into Mongolian culture. These similarities contributed to the enthusiastic acceptance of Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia. At the beginning of the 13th century, the Mongols lived as a group of around 700,000 people, as herdsmen on the plains of the Gobi Desert and in the southern Siberia forests. The great universal ruler, titled Genghis Khan, rose to power in 1206. It was believed by Genghis and his followers that he was the rightful ruler of the world. This belief justified his warfare and the devastation his conquest brought upon so many peoples. In 1210, the ruler of the Jin dynasty in northern China demanded the Mongols submit to them. As the Jin had control of the Silk Road, and hence control of the flow of goods, Genghis Khan decided that war was the only answer. He overthrew them by 1215 and had control over the area and the trade he needed. In 1218, he sent a caravan to Central Asia to request more open trade, and a ruler of the area killed them. This set off a spark of rage among the Mongols, and they set to attack the region in 1219 as a pure act of revenge. The fighting during this time was very violent and did not end until 1225, when the Mongols were finally victorious. To put the great empire in perspective, by 1225, Genghis Khan had control of everything between the Caspian Sea and Beijing. He had an empire 4 times as large as that of Alexander the Great. By the time of his death in 1227, he was seen as a holy warrior sent from heaven. His followers believed he would rise again and lead the Mongol people to new victories. Genghis chose his son Ogadai to take his place as head of the Mongolian Empire. Ogadai meant to expand the empire his father had created. In 1231, he sent military forces into Korea to collect payment from an agreement made in 1218. There was resistance and conflict arose that would last for decades. He also completed the invasion of northern China, and by 1234 he had complete control of the region. But the conquest ended abruptly with his death on December 11, 1241. The focus became the election of the next Khan. As is commonly the case with the fall of one Khan, problems arise as to who will take over rule of the empire. There is no shortage of descendants to choose from. However, Ogadai's widow assumes power, while waiting for the election to occur. She begins to prepare the way for her son to become the next ruler. Her son buys support and ultimately wins the title of the next Khan, only to die unexpectedly in 1248. His cousin, Mangu, becomes the next great Khan, elected in 1251. Mangu was a staunch admirer of Genghis and modeled himself after the great Khan. He was determined to continue the legacy of war and conquering. In the 1250s, Mangu sent one of his brothers, Hulagu, towards Mesopotamia to overthrow the region. As the army passed through Persia, they destroyed a Muslim sect that opened the Mongols' path to Baghdad, one of the richest cities of the time. In 1258, the Mongols, led by Hulagu, began vicious attacks on the Sunni Muslims of the region. Christians and Shia Muslims rejoiced in the Mongol attacks and fought with them to put down the Sunnis. Christians took out their anger at the Islamic world during these slaughters at Baghdad. Many tens of thousands were killed, wrote a Chinese visitor to Baghdad a year later. The Islamic world was in shock from these vicious attacks. In 1259, Mangu Khan died in battle. His brother Kublai Khan ran for the election of the new great Khan, and won. Splits among the empire had already existed when Kublai Khan became the ruler. Regions were already being ruled independently of each other. There was no longer a great Khan overseeing the entire empire. Hulagu was ruling in the Ilkhanate, which is today Iraq and Iran. Berke was ruling in the Golden Horde in Russia. Ancestors in Central Asia were also acting independently of Kublai Khan. As a result of these splits, Kublai Khan began to focus on his Chinese empire. His reign lasted from 1260 until his death in 1294. It is in the Chinese empire that the great Chinese Yuan dynasty is founded. In it, Kublai Khan founded a great capital, which is today the modern-day Beijing. The Khan leaders were very tolerant of all religions. However, Tibetan Buddhism became the dominant religion for the Mongolian people. Tibet and Mongolia had many geographical and cultural characteristics that allowed for a seamless integration of Tibetan Buddhism into Mongolian culture. Both Tibet and Mongolia are located in Inner Asia, in an arid climate, in mountainous regions. Both had very different cultures from that of China. Both Mongolian and Tibetan people embraced a nomadic lifestyle. The traditional religion in Mongolia, called Bo, was quite similar to the pre-Buddhist conversion of the Tibetans, called Ban. The Mongols and the Tibetans also had emotional and psychological similarities. It was under the rule of Ogadai that Buddhism flourished. There is evidence that Buddhist stupas and temples were built in Mongolia. Buddhist texts were studied and religions were freely debated. The Khans preferred Tibetan Buddhism to Chinese Buddhism. The Tibetan tradition presented a counterbalance to Confucianism and other Chinese influences that the Khans preferred to minimize. It was during the time of Kublai Khan that Buddhism in Mongolia became a state religion. He became a Buddhist himself. He invited a Tibetan Lama to be in charge of the Buddhist temple in his region. This Lama encouraged Kublai Khan to rule peacefully. He argued that peace can be obtained only by peace. He developed a ruling philosophy that was twofold: the Khan's power and the Dharma. Kublai Khan embraced this philosophy in his leadership, and Buddhism became an important part of politics in Mongolia. With the acceptance of a peaceful religion like Tibetan Buddhism, the warring strategies of the Mongolian people diminished. However, Buddhism consistently remained the religion of the ruling class. The commoners remained more shamanistic in their beliefs. When Kublai Khan's empire began to fade, the rule of Buddhism in the region also began to fade. However, the impact it left on the Mongol culture was enough that the religion would be revived in later years. After the collapse of the peaceful rule of Kublai Khan, Mongolia again became a war-stricken region. Altan Khan was the leader at the end of the 16th century when Buddhism again saw a revival. Altan Khan formed a relationship with a Tibetan Buddhist, Sonam Gyatso, and ordained him a Dalai Lama. There are even indications that Altan's great-grandson was an incarnation of the Dalai Lama, showing a strong link between Mongolia and Tibetan Buddhism. With this 16th century revival, Buddhism became more openly accepted among the common people. The people were so uneasy from centuries of invasions and civil wars, they now embraced the peaceful religion. The teachings of Tibetan Buddhism brought comfort to the Mongolian people. It became the dominant religion in Mongolia from then on. The Mongolian Empire began with a great leader, Genghis Khan, who brought civilization to the Mongolian people. The technique he used to build the empire was one of war and bloody conquests. However, Genghis Khan was tolerant of all religions, and his successors continued this tradition of tolerance. This attitude allowed Tibetan Buddhism to travel to Mongolia. Kublai Khan, the last great Khan, was a Buddhist and even brought the Dharma into his ruling philosophy, working closely with a trusted Lama. Buddhism brought peace to the Mongolian people during the rule of Kublai Khan. When this empire finally ended, war again came to Mongolia. The seeds of Buddhism had been so ingrained in the Mongol culture that Buddhism was able to return and bring peace to the region once again in the 16th century. Religion often brings comfort and understanding to a people. Buddhism served this role to the Mongolian people during the rule of Kublai Khan and again centuries later.